The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly 2 kilometers. The ceiling was so high that clouds sometimes hovered near the peak. The light emanated from thousands of floating crystals that the Valorans had cultivated over 10,000 years. Every surface was smooth and perfect. Treasures from a dozen different worlds were hidden in every nook and cranny. This was the center of galactic civilization, a place where important decisions were made. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in her designated spot on the floor. She was 63 years old, her hair graying around her temples, and her face had lines from years of laughing when she wanted to scream. For 22 years, she had been the voice of humanity in this hall. Others had stood there too. They had made the same plea and received the same answer. It would be the same today. She knew it, but she had to try anyway. The hall was filled with representatives of over 300 species of life. Most of them floated in specialized chambers tailored to their particular habitat. Some breathed methane, others lived in liquids, a few existed as pure energy patterns trapped in magnetic jars. But the key decision-makers sat on raised platforms at the back of the hall. The High Council of the Galactic Conquerors was made up of 3 races. The Valorans were tall and lean, with polished silver skin and soft, glowing blue eyes. They had founded Concord 12,000 years ago. Their world was a paradise, blessed with gentle breezes and warm seas. Nothing on Varia tried to kill them. They evolved in peace, believing it to be the natural state of all things. The Tessari were short and round, covered in soft golden fur, with 4 arms and perpetually smiling faces. But Elena had long ago learned that the Tessari's smiles meant nothing. Their world was even more peaceful than Varia's. The most dangerous creatures on their planet were small insects that occasionally caused a mild itch. The Catharani were the youngest of the 3 ancient races, and resembled Earth's octopuses, but were larger and had more tentacles. They floated in anti-gravity fields and communicated by changing the color of their skin. Their ocean world was so calm and nutritious that they didn't need to create competition. They simply existed, grew intelligent, and eventually reached for the star. These 3 races decided long ago that they understood the universe. They mapped the galaxy, created its laws, and built civilizations that outlasted humanity. And they were absolutely certain they knew what was best for everyone else. Elena waited for the debate to end. Several minor races had requested permission to expand their mining operations. The council approved it within a minute. The request had likely been approved days before. The public debate was a sham. Finally, her name was called. Elena walked to the center of the Great Hall. The spotlight found her, and thousands of people could see her. She had done this so many times. The walking no longer frightened her. Now it was just tiring. The Valen High Inquisitor announced that the representative of Earth may speak. His name was Kes Veloth, and he had held his position for over 2 centuries. He had seen every human ambassador who had stood in these halls, and had rejected every request they had made. Elena took a breath. Esteemed members of the council and esteemed delegates, I stand before you today to renew my petition for human colonial expansion rights in the Outer Rim territories. A soft thud echoed through the hall. Perhaps he was surprised. Perhaps he was amused. Elena continued, in any case, humanity has been part of the Galactic Federation for 200 years. We have obeyed your laws, paid your tributes, and fulfilled the roles you have given us. We have asked for nothing less than the same rights enjoyed by other species. She paused for a moment. Somewhere in the hall, as Sasari was already laughing. Her voice was high-pitched and musical, but also deeply insulting. There were 17 unclaimed habitable worlds in the Outer Rim territories. Human populations had outgrown what the current colonies could support. We needed space to expand. We needed resources to develop. We needed the same opportunities that had been given to every other species living on this Concord. The Valerian High Arbiter raised a hand gracefully, a gesture that silenced the room. Ambassador Vasquez, this petition has been presented 47 times over the past 2 centuries, and the answer has always been the same. Do you expect anything different today? Elena said, I expect justice. I expect fairness. I expect this council to respect its belief. Then the Tessari envoy spoke. His name was Milaran, widely considered the most cultured man in Concord, but also, in Elena's opinion, the cruelest. He had explained it many times before. Humanity was not yet ready to expand. And when would it ever be ready? Elena asked, how can we prove ourselves? Milaran spread his arms wide in mock sympathy. You must understand your place in the cosmic order. You come from a world of grade 12 death. Your species evolved through violence and conflict. These traits are alarming. These instincts must not be allowed to spread unchecked throughout the galaxy. Elena felt her fists clench at her sides. She forced herself to relax. Earth is our home, we did not choose it. We survived them should we be punished for our strength. The Kutani representative pulsed with a color Elena knew meant mockery. Is that what you call mockery? In your world, creatures hunt each other for food. Weather systems can destroy entire cities. Bacteria themselves can kill. You did not learn strength, Ambassador. You learned the tenacity of a vermin. The hall roared with laughter. Hundreds of species, thousands of beings were laughing at humanity, at Elena, and all her people had achieved. She stood in the center of the laughter, motionless. She had mastered this technique long ago. She learned to stand still while the galaxy jeered. She learned to remain calm while her heart burned with rage. This was what it meant to be human in the Galactic Concordance. What 2 centuries of membership had given them. The Supreme Arbiter raised his hand again. The laughter slowly died down. Ambassador Vasquez, your petition has been denied again. Humanity will remain within its current borders. This is for the protection of the galaxy, but also for your own sake. Our protection. Elena couldn't hide the bitterness in her voice. You deny us our resources. You deny us our technology. You deny us representation on the council. How is that supposed to protect us? You will not understand, Malaran said. Your species is still young. Your perspective is limited. With time, perhaps 1,000 years, you will gain the wisdom to see things as we do. Until then, you must trust our guidance. Elena looked around the hall. She saw hundreds of faces, hundreds of different life forms. Some looked at her with pity, others with contempt. A very few, looked at her with what could be considered sympathy. They were other backward races, those who had also been rejected, those who truly understood how she felt. I have a question, Elena said. Has any species in the history of the Galactic Concordance ever risen from junior membership to the High Council? The question seemed to surprise the older species. They exchanged glances. Finally, the High Adjudicator answered. No, that has never happened. The Council was established by the 3 founding species, and it will continue to be led by the 3 founding species. This is the natural order, Elena repeated. It is the natural order, and this natural order will never change. No matter what any species does, how much they accomplish, or how long they wait. There is a hierarchy in the universe. Some species must lead, and others must follow. Humanity's role is clear. You come from a world of death and conflict. You have that instinct in your blood. True power is not given to you. Elena nodded slowly. She knew it was true. She had known it for years, but it still hurt to hear it said so bluntly, so casually. Thank you, Exalted Arbiter, for your honesty. Now the situation was clear. She turned and returned to her place on the floor. The spotlight shone on her for a moment, then quickly moved on. The next petition was called. Some species wanted to adjust trade agreements. The galaxy just kept moving forward, not caring about humanity at all. Elena stood there, watching the events unfold, but not really seeing anything. Her mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with the message she would send to the human delegation once they returned to their quarters. A message prepared decades ago, waiting for the right time. A message that would change everything. The session continued for another 4 hours. Elena stayed until the end, as was customary. Then she walked the beautiful corridors of Concord Station. Past gardens filled with alien flowers and gravity-defying fountains. She passed the Valorans who looked right at her as if she didn't exist. She passed the Theory who smiled meaninglessly. She passed the Kutani who pulsed with colors she couldn't possibly understand. Finally, she reached the human quarters. It was small compared to the rest of the delegation. The corridors were simple, the rooms functional. The Concord had given humanity just enough space to survive, and nothing more. Her staff were waiting for her. They were watching the session on a screen. They knew what had happened. Their faces bore the same mixture of anger and resignation that Elena felt inside. They're laughing at us again, her Lieutenant James Chen said. He was only 35 years old. He still believed that negotiations could change the situation. Elena remembered when she was a child, having had such hopes. They'll laugh at us forever, Elena said. Until we can't laugh anymore. She went to her office and closed the door. Then she sat down at her desk and activated her most secure communications equipment. It was not Concord-approved technology. Concord was unaware of its existence. There was much Concord did not know about humanity. Elena typed a message. It was short. It had been agreed upon long before she was born. The words were simple, but the implications were vast. Option Prometheus approved. Initiate evacuation protocols. They will never see us as equals. The time had come for them to become a force to be reckoned with. She sent a message to Earth, traveling through channels the Concords could not detect. It would reach the Star Federation Council within hours and everything would change. Elena sank back into her chair and closed her eyes. 200 years later, her species had endured 2 centuries of insults and rejection. They had played the role of a lowly, backward race, pretending to accept their position. They had led the galaxy to believe that humanity was what the Council said it was, a stubborn pest who somehow learned to build starship. But the galaxy was wrong. They had gazed upon mankind's deadly origins and seen its weakness. They had witnessed its struggles and known its primal instincts. But they had never considered the alternative, never imagined that a species forged in constant danger might learn to plan, to wait, to conceal its true strength until the time was right. The Galactic Federation believed it understood humanity, but the Federation was wrong, and soon the galaxy would find out just how wrong it was. Elena opened her eyes and looked out the window. Stars filled the darkness. Somewhere far away there were 17 inhabited planets, home to nearly 50 billion people. They had been told to be patient, to have faith in the plan. They had been told that one day they would wait, and finally that day came. In the great halls of the Galactic Concordance, old races debated. They approved petitions, denied others. They made decisions that would affect trillions of lives. They believed they would continue this way forever. They didn't know that in a small office in the human section, an old woman had lit a fuse that would burn for 50 years. They didn't know that the race they had mocked and ignored was about to disappear before their eyes. And they didn't know that when humanity returned, the galaxy would never be the same again. The stars continued to shine. The universe continued to spin. And somewhere in the void, humanity began preparing for the future it always wanted. Ambassador Vasquez's message reached Earth in 6 hours, passing through relay stations hidden among asteroids and moons, following a path never before detected by Concord's sensor. When it arrived at the Federated Suns Council's secure facility in the foothills of the Swiss Alps, alarms began ringing in offices around the world. Within 24 hours, the entire council was assembled in a massive underground chamber. 200 representatives from each of Earth's nations sat in curved rows facing a central platform. Above them, a holographic display showed the 17 human colony planets, each represented by a representative, connected by a secure quantum link. Standing in the center was Secretary General Marcus Webb. He was 78 years old and a former military officer who had spent his life preparing for this moment. His father had been a member of the council, and his grandfather had helped found it. For 4 generations, his family had kept the secret of the Promethean option, awaiting the day it would finally be used. "You have received Ambassador Vasquez's message," and he said it was softly spoken but carried to every corner of the chamber. "For 200 years we have played a role, a picture of what the galaxy expected of us. Today that pretense ends." A representative from the colony planet New Beijing spoke through a holographic link. "Is withdrawal really necessary? Perhaps we can negotiate further. Or perhaps we can find another way." Webb shook his head slowly. "Cheney, you know as well as I that the negotiations have failed. 47 petitions denied. 2 centuries of humiliation, and the supreme adjudicator himself telling Ambassador Vasquez that he cannot entrust power to humanity. There is no path forward within Concord. There never has been. But leaving would mean isolation." Another representative said, "We would lose access to Concord's trade routes. We would lose access to their technology markets. Our economy depends on these connections. Our economy depends on what they allow us to do," Webb responded. "They give us leftovers and expect us to be grateful. They deny us the resources we need to grow. They weaken us and call it protection." He paused, then looked around the chamber. "Think about it, everyone. 200 years after joining Concord, has humanity become stronger or weaker? Has it grown or been contained?" The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the answer. Concord believes humanity is primitive. Webb continued, "They believe we don't have anything they need. They believe that without their guidance we would destroy ourselves." A thin smile formed on his face. "They are wrong, and it's time they realize just how wrong they are." He pressed a control button on the podium. The holographic display shifted, revealing something most of the delegates had never seen before. Starships, massive spacecraft, weapons platforms, space stations, and a fleet hidden in the darkness between the stars. "Built in secrecy over 2 centuries. This is Prometheus's option," Webb said. "While we played the part of a lowly, backward race, our best scientists and engineers were working on other projects. Projects Concord knew nothing about. We had spent 2 centuries studying their technology, understanding their science and surpassing it. A murmur of surprise rang through the chamber. The new representative from Beijing stared at the screen, eyes wide. How is this possible? Concord monitors all advanced technological developments. Construction on this scale would have been detected. They're watching in the hope of finding something, Webb replied. They expect primitive people building primitive things. They never dig deep. They never imagined we could do more. Their arrogance is our greatest weapon. He changed the display again. This time it showed the human realm, the 17 colony worlds and the routes connecting them. Once we withdraw from Concord, we will seal off the border completely. No Concord ships can enter. No Concord signals can enter. No communications. For how long? Someone asked. As long as necessary. 50 years. Maybe more. We need time to build. Time to prepare. Time to become a force the galaxy cannot reckon with. The vote took 3 hours. Every delegate spoke. Some expressed fear. Some expressed hope. Some simply expressed weariness, after centuries of humiliation. But in the end, a vote was taken, and it passed unanimously. Humanity is withdrawing from galactic conquest. This announcement was conveyed to the Concord Council. The next day, Ambassador Vasquez personally delivered the proclamation. Standing one last time in the Great Hall where she had been ridiculed and rejected so many times, she said, "Humanity of Earth hereby withdraws from galactic conquest." Her voice was calm, her face betrayed no emotion. "We renounce our status as junior member. We reject your authority over our realm. We renounce all treaties, all trade agreements, all diplomatic relations. From this moment on, humanity speaks for itself." The hall was silent. Never before in Concord's 12,000 years of history had a race withdrawn voluntarily. It was unthinkable. It was impossible. And yet here was a small, primitive human woman. As I stood before the mightiest of galaxies and announced humanity's retreat, Supreme Arbiter Ketos was the first to regain consciousness, his silver face set in a kind, condescending expression. "Ambassador Vasquez, this is unexpected, but I'm sure you understand that retreat is never easy. There are treaties to consider, obligations to fulfill, debts to repay. All of humanity's debts have been settled," Elena replied. "Our accountants have done the math. We owe Concord nothing. You owe us everything." Melaran snapped, his golden fur ruffling in genuine rage. "Without Concord's protection, your pathetic colony would have been destroyed decades ago. Without our guidance, your kind would still be throwing stones at each other." Elena gave a small smile. "Perhaps so, but let's try our luck." Representative Kutani's pulse throbbed with a hint of contempt. "You are making a huge mistake. The galaxy is dangerous. There are threats you are unaware of. Without the Concord's protection, humanity would not survive, even a century." "Then that is the path we choose," Elena said. "Farewell, esteemed council members. We shall never speak to you again," she said, finally exiting the Great Hall. Behind her, the old races looked on with looks of shock and amazement. The pests were gone. The relentless, annoying humans were truly gone. It was so unexpected that no one knew how to react. But as the shock wore off, a new feeling welled up inside him. Relief. The humans had always been troublemakers. They always asked questions, complained, and refused to accept their rightful place in the world. Now they were gone. Concord could finally move forward, free from their constant frustration. The Supreme Arbiter spoke calmly to his audience. "Let this go down in history. The races of Earth have chosen to leave the galactic concordance. They will not be pursued, nor will they be forced to return. They will simply wait." He paused, looking around the hall. "They have 10 years, perhaps less. Without our technology, our trade and our protection, they will realize their mistake. They will stumble back and beg to be reinstated. And then at last, they may understand their position." There was a murmur of agreement in the hall. "Yes, that is what will happen. The foolish humans would fight alone for a few years, perhaps a decade, and then they would return more humble, more receptive to the wisdom of their conquests. This retreat was just a tantrum. It would pass." But in a small research station orbiting the colony planet of Tessari, a young scholar named Kes Vaughn watched the recording of the retreat announcement with growing anxiety. He had spent his career studying alien life, especially exotic creatures, and there was something disturbing about Ambassador Vasquez's face. She didn't look angry. He didn't seem desperate. He looked satisfied, like he'd finally accomplished a long, difficult mission, like he knew exactly what was going to happen next. Kevin gathered all the data he could find on Earth. Data was limited. Concord had never considered humanity worthy of detailed study, but what he found deeply disturbed him. Earth had been classified as a Class 1-2 death world. the second highest possible danger. The planet was plagued by unstable climates that threatened to devastate entire regions, pack-hunting predators using complex strategies, constantly evolving diseases that overwhelmed under-adapted immune systems, and disasters like earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods and droughts. By any standard, it was a nightmarish world from which nothing should have survived. Yet humanity didn't just survive, it thrived. They spread to every continent, every climate and every environment, building civilizations in deserts and jungles, mountains and islands, frozen wastelands and tropical swamps. Wherever death threatened to overtake them, they found a way to persevere. Kefrian read the historical records with growing interest. Humans had developed agriculture in lands that produced nothing but poison and thorns. They had crossed the oceans in wooden ships and navigated by the stars. Little he understood. They survived a plague that wiped out half the population, rebuilt their society within a few generations, and invented weapons of unimaginable destructive power, yet somehow chose not to use them to destroy themselves, unlike the behavior of primitive vermin. This was the act of a species that had been tested by the universe itself and would not yield. He wrote a report and sent it to his superiors at the Tessari Academic Council, explaining his concerns. He suggested that perhaps humanity was not what the Concordat envisioned. He suggested that the withdrawal be treated with caution, not dismissed. But his report was ignored. His superiors politely replied, thanking him for his diligence, and suggesting he focus on more productive research. Humanity no longer matters. Humanity is gone. That's it. Kefrian didn't accept this answer. He continued his research in secret, collecting all the data he could find about human history, human psychology and human achievements. And the more he learned, the more anxious he became. Human behavior had patterns, he saw them, but his superiors refused to acknowledge them. When pushed, humans fight back. When threatened, they adapt. Even when told it's impossible, they find a way to get it done. This wasn't the pattern of a species that would give up in return for help. It was the pattern of a species that would use its isolation to transform itself into something new. He tried again to warn someone. He contacted his scientific colleagues in Valoran and shared his findings. All he got in return was laughter. Kefrian, my friend, you worry too much. Humans are clever. They are adaptable. Yes, but they are still just primitives from a dead world. They have no real science, no real technology. We have nothing to fear. In 10 years they will return and we will welcome them with open arms, because that is what civilized people do. Kefrian wanted to argue. He tried to explain that underestimating a species evolved in the Class 1 and 2 worlds was extremely dangerous. He wanted to point out that humanity had a history of surprising its enemies at the worst possible time, but he knew it was futile. The conquered had already made up their mind. Humanity was abandoned. Humanity was forgotten. Humanity was no longer worth thinking about. So Kefrian returned to his study and waited. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know how long it would take. But he was sure of one thing. When humanity emerges from its isolation, the galaxy will regret not having been more careful. Meanwhile, across human space, borders were closing, starships were being recalled, stations were being locked down, and communications arrays were being shut down. 17 colony worlds and their 50 billion humans began to disappear from the galactic network. Secretary General Webb watched from his office on Earth. The retreat was proceeding according to plan. In a few weeks, humanity would disappear entirely from Concord's sensor. The galaxy would think humanity had retreated into primitive isolation, but they were mistaken. In the secret shipyards that dot humanity's realm, construction was accelerating. Thousands of workers, eager for this moment, were about to begin their real work. Scientists opened laboratories never registered with Concord. Engineers activated machines that represented the fruits of 2 centuries of secret development. Humanity was not retreating, it was preparing. Webb looked over the latest reports and basked in a small sense of satisfaction. Concord had prepared itself for defeat. The Confederation expected that humanity would return in 10 years, humiliated and defeated. This would come as a great surprise to the Confederation. 50 years passed. At first, the Galactic Confederation had not forgotten humanity's existence. The High Council occasionally mentioned the retreat incident and predicted the imminent return of the wayward race. Diplomats prepared welcoming speeches. Trade negotiators drafted new treaties, even more restrictive than the previous one. Everyone expected humanity to slither back, just as the Supreme Adjudicator had predicted, but they never returned. 10 years later, the prophecy was reversed. Maybe it would take 20 years. Humanity was stubborn. They might hold out longer than expected, but eventually they would be faced with the harsh reality of their isolation and would be forced to seek Concord's aid. 20 years passed, and certainty began to turn to confusion. Humanity must have made contact by now. Its primitive technology must have failed. The colony must have been in trouble, but there was no communication, no distress signal, no sign of collapse. 30 years later, the Concorde sent the first probe to the edge of human space. The probes detected nothing. No ships, no bases, no signals of any kind. It was as if humanity had vanished. 40 years later, the High Council determined that humanity had likely destroyed itself. Their death instinct had finally caught up with them. Infighting, resource depletion, technological failure. Something had to have gone wrong. The galaxy was forever freed from the burden of primitive humanity. This explanation satisfied most species. They erased humanity from official records. They wiped human colonies from maps. They forgot the human race had even existed. But Keffian had not forgotten. He was old now, over 200 by Cesari's standards. His golden fur had faded to a pale cream color. His forearms were slower than before, but his mind was sharper and his obsession with humanity undiminished. For 50 years he had collected every bit of information he could find. Most of it was useless. Concorde had never bothered to study humans closely, but every once in a while something interesting would emerge. Sensor anomalies on the edge of human space, gravitational distortions that shouldn't exist, unexplained energy bursts. These anomalies were rare and easy to ignore, but Keffian noticed they were occurring more frequently and in greater magnitude. He requested a meeting with the Tessari Academic Council to present his finding. To his surprise, they agreed. Perhaps it was out of curiosity. Perhaps it was to curry favor with the old researcher. Whatever the reason, Keffian stood before some of humanity's most respected minds and explained why he believed humanity was not yet doomed. The anomalous phenomena are forming a pattern, he said, displaying the data on the Council's holographic system. They are concentrated in specific locations along the boundaries of space once inhabited by humanity, and are occurring at regular intervals that are increasing in both frequency and intensity. The council members exchanged suspicious looks. What are you talking about? The senior scholar asked. Humanity is still active, building something. I'm saying we don't know what they're doing, Kesson replied, and that worries me deeply. Species don't evolve by being passive in a world of 1 or 2 deaths. Humanity is a survivor. We adapt and we overcome. The idea that they would simply collapse after retreating contradicts everything we know about their history. Theirs is a primitive one, another council member stated. They spent most of their existence fighting each other over resources and ideology. Before they developed space travel, they nearly destroyed their own planet. If they were to destroy themselves now, it would be in keeping with their nature. Keffian felt a familiar bout of irritation well up inside him. With all due respect, you miss the point. Humans are violent, yet aggressive, yes, but they're also incredibly adept at channeling that nature against external threats. Humans are frighteningly effective at uniting when faced with a common enemy, and for the past 200 years, Concorde had been their common enemy. This statement caused an uproar among the council members. The Concords were never their enemy, protested the senior scholar. We granted them membership. We gave them access to galactic civilization. We protected them. We mocked them. Kisan said quietly. We denied their petitions. We called them vermin. We told them they could never be entrusted with power. We made them feel small and worthless for 2 centuries. He paused for a moment, and we were surprised to see them leave. The meeting ended without a resolution. The council thanked Ketzvon for his efforts and promised to look into his concerns. We knew the council would do nothing. The Concords had decided that humanity was doomed, and would not change their belief until the evidence became too compelling to ignore. That evidence arrived 5 years later. A Kotharani scout fleet was conducting routine patrols near the outer edge. This region had once bordered human territory, but over the decades the border had become meaningless. There was nothing there. Everyone knew there was nothing there. The fleet consisted of 12 ships, each well-armed and experienced. Their captains were veterans of many campaigns. When the first anomaly appeared on her sensors, she ordered her fleet to investigate. Perhaps it was simply a natural phenomenon. Perhaps a dying star or a stray asteroid. But there was no need to worry. They were wrong. What the sensors detected was inexplicable. A larger energy signature than any the Truktreni had ever recorded. Gravitational distortions suggested an object of impossible mass and motion. Something was moving through the void. Something large and powerful. Fleet Command ordered the fleet to stay put and record everything. She sent a message to Conqueror Command, explaining what they had witnessed. She then awaited further instructions. Before Conquered Command could react, the command didn't reach them. The anomaly shifted. Energy signatures converged. Gravity distortions aligned. And suddenly, incredibly, something emerged from the darkness. It was a ship. At least, Fleet Commander guessed it was a ship, but it was larger than any ship she had ever seen. Larger than any ship that could possibly exist. It dwarfed her entire fleet, even Valeria's largest dreadnought, the size of a small moon. And that was just the first. There were more. Dozens. Then hundreds. Ships of all sizes. From small ships that might be fighters, to massive ships that seemed to warp space around them. They glided through the void in perfect formation, like a single organism. Each ship, painted in colors that stood out against the blackness of space, bore a symbol the fleet commander didn't recognize, a blue and green sphere, Earth. The Truck-Trenny fleet attempted to retreat, activating their thrusters and heading toward the conquered sector. But the human ships were faster. They were incredibly fast. They appeared around the retreating fleet in an instant, completely surrounding it without a single shot being fired. At that moment a transmission came in. A human voice speaking in perfect Cutharani. This was from the Human Defense Force ship, Prometheus, to the Cutharani scout fleet. There was no danger. You are given permission to leave. Return to Concord and deliver this message. We remember. We are ready. We are on our way. The fleet commander replied, demanding explanation, trying to understand what was happening. But the human ships were already receding, disappearing into the darkness from which they had aided. Within minutes, the Truck-Trenny fleet was once again isolated, surrounded by emptiness. The return to conquered territory took 3 weeks. All the while the fleet commander reviewed the sensor data, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. The numbers didn't add up. This technology couldn't exist. Humanity was supposed to be primitive. Humanity was supposed to be dead. Humanity was already considered a minor nuisance, forgotten by the galaxy. Upon reaching the Cutharani sector, she transmitted her records to Concord headquarters. Within hours an emergency meeting was called, and the High Council convened for the first time in years. Scientists analyzed the data and declared it impossible. The military commanders surveyed the ranks and paled. Cutharan was called in by the veterans to give his assessment. He looked at the records with weary eyes and said the words everyone was thinking. But no one wanted to say, "I warned you. I've been warning you for 50 years and you didn't listen." The chief adjudicator demanded an explanation. How did humanity develop such technology? Where did they get the resources? Why didn't the Concords detect anything? Because you didn't see, Kusur. Because you assumed a race from the underworld could never match your achievements. Because your arrogance blinded you to the obvious truth. And what is that truth? Kifaran turned to the council. Humanity didn't evolve in a paradise-like world. They evolved in a world that tried to kill them their entire lives. They learned to plan, they learned to build, and they learned to hide their power until the time was right. You gave them 200 years to study your technology and find your weaknesses, and he gave them 50 years of isolation to use that knowledge. He paused. What did you think they would do? Give up and die? Before anyone could react, a new transmission came through. It was broadcast on all frequencies, penetrating every communication system within Concord. A single message was repeated in every known language. A human woman appeared on the screen. She was old, her face lined and her hair snow-white, but her eyes were sharp and clear, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Human Defense Force, speaking on behalf of the Earth race, she said after a pause. 50 years ago I stood before your council and announced humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Concord. You laughed at me, you ignored, you predicted our failure and forgot we existed. Her face hardened. We remember every insult, every petition that was rejected. When you called us vermin, when you said we could never be trusted, we remember it all. The image cut to a human fleet, hundreds of ships, thousands of ships, more ships than the Concord ever assembled in one place. They filled the screen, stretching to the horizon of space. This was 50 years of memory. This is what happens when you underestimate a race from a dead planet. This is the price of hubris. Elena Vasquez was back on screen. There was no anger or hatred on her aged face, only a calm, patient determination that was somehow more frightening than rage. We are going to Valeria Prime, to the heart of your conquer, not to destroy, not to conquer, but to have the conversation that should have taken place 250 years ago. She leaned forward slightly. Her eyes seemed to stare directly at all beings watching the transmission. You are advised to prepare yourself. The transmission ended. Silence fell over every council, every government agency, and every home that received the message. The galaxy had forgotten humanity. Now humanity was reminding them, and the galaxy was not yet ready for what happened next. The Valane home system had never seen anything like it. For 12,000 years, Valeria Prime had been the center of galactic civilization. The most powerful species in the universe had gathered here to build beautiful things. The orbital stations that orbited the planet were masterpieces of engineering and works of art. The defense platforms protecting the system were the greatest ever. The fleets patrolling the space lanes seemed invincible, but it was all for naught. The human fleet emerged from the folded space in a wave of light and energy that overwhelmed every sensor in the system. One moment there was nothing. The next moment there was a folding of starships. Thousands of ships. Never before in the history of the Galactic Concordance had such large numbers gathered in one place. The Valerian defense coordinator stared at his screen in disbelief. His training had taught him to issue orders. His experience had taught him to organize a response. But his instincts told him something simpler. This was not a battle, but a declaration. The human fleet spread out across the system in perfect formation. Small ships positioned around defensive platforms without firing a shot. Medium ships blocking the conquered fleet's escape routes without threatening them. Then a ship, larger than any the Valerians had ever constructed, slowly approached the planet itself. In the center of the formation floated a ship that was clearly the flagship. It was not the largest ship in the fleet, but it radiated power far beyond its size. Its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The engines burned in a color that had no name in any language in the Valerian language, and on the ship's gold prow, painted against the darkness, the words "Prometheus ascended" stood out. The High Council gathered in the emergency room as the human fleet approached. Supreme Arbiter Catus had been in power for over 250 years. He had led Concord through countless crises. This had never happened before. How could this be? He demanded. Our intelligence agencies said humanity didn't have much of a military capability. Our scientists said our technology was primitive. How on earth did we build something like this? No one could answer. The truth was too painful to accept. The Concordat was wrong. The Concordat was catastrophically, humiliatingly wrong. Miluron, the Tessari envoy who once called humans vermin, sat in silence. His golden fur had lost its luster over the decades. His forearms trembled slightly. For 50 years, he had begged for remission, believing that humans would return. Now they had returned with the power to destroy everything he knew. What do they want? The Kitrani representative asked, her skin flushed red with fear and confusion. They said they were there for a discussion. What discussion would require a fleet of this size?
A discussion they couldn't refuse? Keith Van said. He was retired but had been called to an emergency meeting. The council finally wanted to hear his opinion. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to impose terms. The fleet was there only to ensure we were listening. The Supreme Arbiter turned to him with a desperate look in his eyes. You have observed them. You have warned us. What do they want? What will satisfy them? Keith Van considered the question carefully. I have spent 50 years trying to understand humanity. I believe I know them better than anyone on Concord, and I can assure you they do not want to destroy us. If that were their goal, they would have attacked already. This fleet has the potential to destroy our civilization. On our own world, they have chosen not to use that power. So what do they want? Recognition, Kevs said simply. Respect, recognition that they are not inferior. What they want is what they have always wanted. The only difference is that now they have the power to demand it. A comm signal interrupted the discussion. The human flagship was calling to them. The High Arbiter had no choice but to accept. The screen flickered, then lit up, and there she was. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was 270 years old, kept alive by technology the Conquered had never even known existed. Her face was lined, but her eyes burned with the same fire they had when she first emerged from the council chambers 50 years ago. Greetings, Judge Ketas, she said. Her voice was clear and strong. I meet you again, and I fear you barely remember me. The High Arbiter struggled to regain his composure. Ambassador Vasquez, this is unprecedented. Your fleet has entered conquered space without authorization, threatening the very heart of galactic civilization. This is an act of war. Elena smiled. It was not a happy smile. An act of war. That's an interesting word. Let me ask you, High Arbiter, was it an act of war when you denied basic human rights for 2 centuries? Was it an act of war when you mocked us in public meetings? Was it an act of war when you said we were unfit to be entrusted with power? No, we were trying to protect you, to guide you. You were trying to contain us. You saw a race from the underworld, and decided we were dangerous. You were right about that. We are dangerous, but not in the way you imagine. Elena rose from her chair and walked over to the screen. Behind her, the bridge of her ship was visible. Across the universe, humans worked on stations, young and old of all skin tones, looks and backgrounds. All united, all focused, all proud. High Arbiter, I have something to tell you.
This will take a moment, all of you. Listen carefully. She reached into her uniform and pulled out a small device. When she activated it, a holographic display appeared next to her. Thousands of lines of text scrolled slowly across the screen. This is a list, Elena said. Every insult, every injustice, every negation, every rejection. For 250 years, humanity has kept records. Records of every time a human being was deemed less than. The text continued to scroll by. Each time a petition was rejected without consideration. Each time your kind looked upon ours as nothing more than primitive vermin. Minutes passed, then hours. The council was silent, unable to do anything but watch as the evidence of their arrogance filled the screen. Elena read an excerpt aloud. She quoted a Tisari diplomat, who mocked human stupidity. She quoted a Valeran scholar, who wrote a treatise on human inferiority. She mentioned a Kothorani military officer, who proposed using human colonies as a buffer against potential threats. The list went on, an endless list of contempt. It took her 3 hours to finish. When she was done, Elena put down the device and faced the screen head-on. And that's our memory. That is what we have carried with us through 50 years of isolation. That is what we have thought about every day as we built this fleet, as we developed this technology and prepared for this moment. She paused. The council waited in horrified silence. And now I will tell you what we wish. The Supreme Arbiter leaned forward. Her silver hands gripped the arms of her chair. Her glowing eyes were wide with fear. Say whatever you need to do to end this peacefully. Any reasonable request will be considered. Elena nodded slowly. Our demands are simple. First, humanity will have 3 permanent seats on the Supreme Council. Not observer status. Not junior membership. Full voting rights on all matters affecting the galaxy. There are 3 seats. Melaran protested. The High Council has only ever had 3 species. Are you asking for double the membership? Elena replied. I'm not asking for that. I'm just telling you what's going to happen. Second, all technological restrictions on humanity will be lifted immediately. We have access to the same resources, the same knowledge, and the same opportunities as other species living in Concord. But these restrictions exist to keep dangerous species at bay, to weaken species like ours. We are no longer weak. These restrictions will be lifted. She continued. Third, species classified as of Deathworld origin will be offered the same rights and opportunities as species from the Paradise world. No more discrimination based on planetary environment. No more assumptions of primitive or dangerous nature. This demand raised further concerns. The galaxy was dotted with dozens of dead planetary species, many of which had been denied membership in Concord outright. Others have been relegated to the bottom of the hierarchy. If they all had full rights, the whole structure of galactic civilization would change. That is unacceptable. The Supreme Arbiter said. You are asking us to change everything, to abandon 12,000 years of tradition, and give power to a species that has never been trusted before. Elena's expression did not change. I call for the equal treatment of all sentient life forms. I understand this is a revolutionary idea to you. If we refuse, will you destroy us? The question hung in the air, and everyone in the council chamber held their breath. Outside, the human fleet waited in complete silence, weapons at the ready but unarmed. No, answered Elena Vasquez. 270, an emissary from a race mocked and ignored for centuries. The Supreme Arbiter blinked, confused. No, we will not destroy you. Our weapons are powerful enough to destroy your civilization in a day. All your defenses will crumble before us. Any fleet we could muster would be overwhelmed. We have spent 50 years preparing for this exact scenario. She paused, and chose not to use that preparation for destruction. What? Elena smiled. This time it was genuine. It contained warmth, and perhaps even compassion, because destruction is easy. Any species can destroy. Any species can exact revenge. Any species can respond to disrespect with violence. She shook her head slowly. But humanity didn't survive on Earth simply by being destructive. We survived by becoming more than our circumstances. We survived by choosing to build rather than destroy. We survived by finding strength beyond physical might. She looked directly at the High Arbiter. Today I have come to prove to you that we are not what you believe we are. Not vermin, nor primitives, nor dangerous animals, unable to control their instincts. We are human beings. We are capable of great violence, but we also have great self-control. Her voice firm. So no, we do not intend to destroy you, but we do not intend to leave either. This fleet will remain in your system until our demands are met.
Our ships will monitor your stations. Our sensors will monitor your communication. Our presence will remind you, every hour of every day, that the species you once considered inferior now holds your fate in their hands. She leaned forward. You will accept our demands, not because we will destroy you if you refuse, but because you will eventually realize we are right, that your hierarchy is built on arrogance and fear, that the galaxy is better off when all species are treated equally. If we never agree, Elena shrugged, we will wait. We are survivors of a dead world. High Arbiter, we are good at waiting. Our fleets have decades worth of supplies, and our crews are prepared for long deployments. Our patience is infinite. She smiled again. Can you say the same? The comm cut out. The council sat in stunned silence. Outside, the human fleet remained vigilant, its weapons silent, its presence imposing. Kevin looked at his colleagues and saw the truth in their faces. They were afraid, humiliated. They were finally beginning to understand what humanity had known all along. The galaxy was changing, and no one could stop it. The human fleet waited for 17 days. During that time, the galactic conquerors experienced something they had never experienced before. For 12,000 years, the Eldar race had believed in their own superiority. They had built their civilization on the assumption that they were wiser, more advanced, and more worthy of leadership than anyone else in the galaxy. Now that assumption had been shattered, they were at a loss as to how to proceed. The High Council met continuously. A fierce debate ensued in the council chamber. Some argued that Concord must not succumb to the threat, urging resistance. Others argued for acceptance, pointing out that the human fleet could destroy them at any moment. However, some proposed a compromise, though no one could agree on its specifics. Meanwhile, word of the crash spread throughout the galaxy. Every species with communication capabilities knew what had happened. The mighty Concords, eternal rulers of civilized space, were being challenged by a species they despised as vermin, and the Concords were powerless to respond. Then on the 8th day, something unexpected happened.
A small ship approached the human blockade. It was not Concords, it was of an unfamiliar design and of unknown origin. It transmitted its identification code, and the human fleet allowed it to pass. The ship carried representatives of 6 races, all survivors of the dead world who had been denied formal membership in Concord. They had all been told for centuries that they were untrustworthy because of their violent origins, and they had come to offer humanity their assistance. Ambassador Vasquez met with them aboard the Prometheus Rising. They told her a story that echoed humanity's own experiences. The Kraviks, whose volcanic home planet forged them into beings of incredible endurance. The Tassiori, an ocean planet so teeming with predators that it makes Earth's sharks look tame. The Mokasun, who learned to survive on almost nothing in their frozen dode. They were all judged by where they came from, not who they became. We have been watching over your kind ever since you joined the Concords, the Kravik representative said, her stony skin reflecting the ship's light as she spoke. We have seen how they treated you. We recognize the pattern. We were treated the same way. Why didn't you speak up? Elena asked. Why has no one ever challenged the Concord hierarchy before? Because we believed we were alone. Because we thought resistance was impossible. Because we believed what they told us about ourselves. Kravik's voice carried centuries of regret. We have forgotten what our ancestors knew. Surviving impossible odds is not weakness. It is the greatest strength in the universe. Elena nodded slowly. So together, let's remind the galaxy. By the 12th day, the small group of supporters of the dead world had grown into a confederation. 17 species from across the galaxy declared their support for humanity's cause. Together, they numbered hundreds of billions and spanned nearly a quarter of the known universe. What began as a single species standing alone against the Concords had grown into a much greater force. The High Council could no longer ignore the reality of their situation. On the 15th day, they requested a formal meeting with Ambassador Vasquez. The ambassador agreed to meet them at Concord Station, a neutral zone on the edge of the Valan system. The weapons were deactivated, and the crew evacuated. Elena walked into the conference room with a small delegation of human and mortal allies. On the other side of the table sat the High Arbiter and representatives of the 3 major races. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the life support machines. Ambassador Vasquez. The High Arbiter began to speak. His voice was tired. His silver skin had lost its luster. The stress of the past 2 weeks has aged him more than he has in the past 2 centuries. We have considered your request but cannot accept it as is. Giving humans 3 seats on the High Council would fundamentally change the structure of galactic governance. Removing all technological restrictions would raise security concerns. Granting full rights to all species on the underworld would mean treating all sentient life forms equally. Elena echoed his words. Yes, That's the point. The High Arbiter spread her arms in a gesture of helplessness. You're asking us to abandon everything we've built, everything we believe in. Hierarchies exist for a reason. Some races are better suited to leadership than others. Is that really true? Elena leaned forward. Tell me, High Arbiter, during your leadership over the course of 12,000 years, how many wars have the conquered fought? Several. All were defensive actions against aggressive races. And how did those wars end? The High Arbiter hesitated. In the end, they ended with the Concord's victory. They perished because people like me fought in your place. The races of the underworld were always sent to the front lines and considered disposable. Even if we weren't assigned other tasks, our violent nature was useful in battle. Elena's voice was calm, but her eyes were cold. You thought I wouldn't notice? You thought I'd forget? Wrong. It was necessary. It was exploitative. You used our power when it was useful, and despised having it. She shook her head. Those days are over. Now the question is whether you will embrace this change or be forced to accept it. The negotiations continued for 2 more days. The ancient race tried every argument, every appeal, every tactic they could think of. They offered compromises, made promises, and threatened outcomes that everyone knew were impossible. In the end, they had no choice. On the 17th day, the Galactic Concordance High Council formally approved humanity's demands. 3 seats were added to the Human Representative Council. All technological restrictions on humanity were lifted, and Concord announced a new policy. No species would be judged by the environment of their home planet, and all sentient life would be treated equally. This news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. In the Concord sector, the old races struggled to accept a new reality where superiority was no longer assumed. In the realms of the dead, billions of life forms celebrated a victory they had never dreamed of. And in humanity's sector, 50 billion people watched as an ambassador signed a treaty that would change everything. The signing ceremony took place in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concordance, the very hall where Elena had been ridiculed and rejected so many times. Now she stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by representatives of every species in the galaxy, on equal footing. Once the final signature was recorded, she stepped onto the podium. The hall fell silent. Thousands of beings watched, waiting to hear what the representative of this once ignored race would say. Elena looked out at the assembled crowd and smiled. 250 years ago, my ancestors first came to this hall. They came with hope. They believed the galaxy would welcome them, accept them, give them a chance to prove their worth. Instead, they were despised. They were told their origins were inferior. They were placed at the bottom of the hierarchy and told to be grateful. She paused. My ancestors could have fought back. They could have used the violence you so feared, but they chose to endure. They chose to wait, to watch, to learn. They chose to trust that one day the galaxy would see them differently. Her voice grew stronger. That day has come. But I do not stand here to be complacent. I do not stand here to celebrate our victory over those who have wronged us. I stand here to tell you what is to come. She gestured to the representatives around her, human and alien alike. A galaxy built on hierarchy is coming to an end. Its replacement must be built on something better, not on fear of the strong, or contempt for the different, or assumptions about which species deserve power and which don't. A new galaxy must be built on awareness, acknowledging that all beings who look up at the stars and imagine what lies beyond should have the opportunity to know. Elena stepped down from the platform and walked over to the archaeological section. The High Arbiter watched her approach with anxious eyes. She stopped in front of him and held out her hand. It is a human custom, she said. A handshake, a sign of agreement between equals, a promise to work together in good faith. The High Arbiter stared at her hand for a long time, then slowly reached out and took his silver fingers wrapped around her wrinkled human hand. It was the first time the High Arbiter had shown such respect to a species from the underworld. I don't know if I can change, he said quietly. I don't know if my people can accept what you are asking of us. Elena nodded. I know change is difficult, but you have time to learn, and we have the patience to wait. She released his hand and smiled. We are survivors of a dead world. Patience is what we do best. The ritual was complete. The coven dispersed, and the galaxy began the long, arduous process of transforming into something new. A year later, the changes were already visible. Human colony ships could roam freely through conquered space, no longer bound to outlying territory. Deathworlder species, denied participation for centuries, now had representation in the parliament. The old hierarchies were crumbling, and the other was rising in their place. Kevin attended the treaty's one-year anniversary celebration. He walked among the crowds of humans and mortal lifeforms, watching them interact with the old races. Tension was still in the air,
and mistrust lingered, but there was also hope. Hope that the galaxy would be better than it had been. He found Ambassador Vasquez, standing alone on the balcony overlooking the celebration. She leaned on the railing, gazing at the stars through the space station's transparent dome. Her aged face was calm and peaceful. "Ambassador," he said, "may I join you?" She turned and smiled. "Kesan," said the researcher who had tried to warn them. "You're welcome." He stood next to her. For a moment they gazed at the stars in silence. "I have spent most of my life studying your species," Kesan said at last. "I thought I understood you, but there is something I still do not understand." "What is it?" "You had the power to destroy us. Your fleet could have wiped out Concord civilization in days, exacting revenge for centuries of humiliation. And yet you didn't." He turned to her. "Why?" Elena considered the question. "What do you think are the differences between the races of the underworld and the races of the paradise world?" "There are probably many, but there's only one that matters. The races of the paradise world never had to learn the most important lesson for survival. Destruction is easy. Creation is hard in your gentle world. There was no need to choose between revenge and reconstruction. There was no need to decide whether to use power for punishment or progress." She looked up at the stars. Humanity had made that choice every time it came into being. Every time the world tried to kill us. Every time we fought each other and came close to destroying ourselves. When we had to decide what kind of race we wanted to be, you always chose creation over destruction. Elena said with a quiet laugh. "No, not always. We have made terrible mistakes. We have committed terrible sins against each other and against the world, but we have also learned from those mistakes. Seeing the devastation ahead, we chose to walk different paths." She turned directly to him. "The Concordat has scorned us for 50 years. We could have responded to that scorn with violence. It would have been justified. It would have been satisfying. It would have vindicated everything you believed about us." Her eyes grew serious. "We came here to prove you wrong, not just our skill or our strength, but who we are. We are not the vermin you imagine us to be. Not mindless destroyers. We are human beings. We are capable of self-control, mercy, and compassion. And we want the galaxy to know it." Kevon was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice filled with a respect he had never felt before. "Ambassador, thank you for showing us this world and giving us a chance to improve ourselves." Elena smiled and held out her hand. "Welcome to your new galaxy, Kevon. I'm sure it will be much more interesting than your old one." He held her hand and felt its warmth. A handshake of equals, the promise of a future built on understanding, not contempt. Behind them, the celebration continued. Human and alien laughed and talked and argued, finding that old ways were fading. New ways were being born. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, human colony ships took off for a new frontier, carrying with them the families, the dreams and the hopes of billions of people. They carried the spirit of a species that had survived the trials of the dead world and emerged stronger. They carried the future. The galaxy could not yet foresee what humanity would become.